Okay, so there's a second critical voltage-gated ion channel that's going to be playing a role in the action potential, and it's going to contribute significantly to what we call the repolarization, the return to the resting potential that will allow the neuron to kind of reset and be able to fire an action potential again should it be depolarized. And this is the voltage-gated potassium channel. And recall that potassium is found in high concentration on the inside of the neuron, and that's because of the pump largely, right, which is pushing all that potassium on the inside. And remember that at minus 65, at the resting potential, there are some leakage channels, right, some protein channels that are ungated and always open, right, through which potassium streams from the inside out. Because the concentration gradient force, remember it's high inside, low outside, will drive it out. And yes, its exiting is opposed by the electrical force because it's a positively charged ion, potassium, K+. And it's inside where it's electrically negative relative to the outside. Remember, it's at minus 65, the resting potential. However, at minus 65, at that level of polarization, the concentration gradient force is stronger and wins out, and it moves its way out. So when we depolarize our neuron, right, to threshold for an action potential, not only do the voltage-gated sodium channels swing open, and all that sodium comes rushing inside, but the voltage-gated potassium channels also swing open, and potassium begins to leave the cell. And I want you to consider why, right? Because it's in high concentration on the inside. And even at minus 65 millivolt difference, right, it's more polarized than the depolarized threshold of minus 55. Even at minus 65, it would leave. The concentration gradient force is stronger than the electrical force holding it in. Well, at minus 55, you've depolarized. You've made the electrical force even a little weaker. So it will continue to go out, right? But what's interesting about the process of the action potential, remember we've got the opening of the voltage-gated, sodium channel, which initiates this process of all that sodium rushing in. Well, remember, all that sodium rushing in is further depolarizing. It doesn't stay at minus 55 millivolts. It goes minus 55, minus 45, minus 35, minus 25. Remember, it reverses polarity, gets positive 20 briefly in here. So that's what this is sort of indicating. You've got at minus 55, yeah, it opens the voltage-gated potassium channel, and potassium starts to leave. And, at minus 55, where it's at only very briefly, the electrical force is still kind of trying to hold it in. So it's leaving, but it's leaving not as fast. It'll increase the rate of exit as you reverse the polarization. You make it positive 20 inside. So all of a sudden you have not only high concentration of potassium on the inside that'll drive it out, but you also have a briefly positive internal environment, that will contribute electrical, repulsion to get it out. So basically the rate at which potassium leaves will increase as the action potential continues. There are lots of things happening in this rather dynamic redistribution of ions across the membrane. It's a very, it changes over time. There's a significant temporal dynamic here. You've got, initiation at minus 55, opening of the voltage-gated sodium channel, sodium rushing in and reversing the polarization. But now think of the sodium on the inside too. It doesn't want to stick around here where it's highly positive, right? And there's a lot of sodium that just rushed in. And the channel, the voltage-gated sodium channel, is now closed. So it can't go back out, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to move, in the direction down the membrane. So we're starting at the, remember the axon hillock right here. And we've got suddenly all this sodium inside, all this potassium streaming out, high concentration of sodium and electrically positive briefly on the inside here. Well, sodium is going to move this way, right? It's going to move away to the next segment of membrane where you have, the neuron at its resting potential, where it's minus 65 on the inside, and there's very little sodium because it's all been kicked out by the pump. So it's going to be driven by the same electrical and concentration gradient forces to come down into this next segment of membrane. And as it does so, it's going to be, these are yes, these are concentrations of stuff, of sodium, right? But it carries a charge. So as it moves into this next segment, you're bringing positively charged ions into this next section of membrane at the resting potential. So it's going to go from minus 65 down, right? You're going to depolarize. So the movement of the sodium itself into that next segment of the neuron is going to depolarize it to the threshold, minus 55, where another slew of voltage-gated sodium channels and potassium channels are going to open, and you're going to get what we call propagation, basically, of this sort of depolarization, repolarization wave working its way down, the axon. That is, really the action potential, and we'll do a summary of this next.